In the cold shadows of the 14th century, a storm of death swept across the lands of Europe, leaving behind silence. Where laughter once lived, it was called the Black Death, a plague that did not simply kill bodies, but broke kingdoms and crushed the spirit of an entire region. Began as whispers of sickness in the east, spreading like fire carried by ships, rats, and fear. And by the time it reached the heart of Europe, the world, as people knew, it would never be the same again. This is the story of how the Black Death changed everything. How it burned through cities, villages, and empires, and how from its ashes a new Europe was born. The Black Death did not come suddenly. It began its journey years before in the lands of Central Asia, where merchants and armies moved along the Silk Road carrying more than just goods, and gold deep within the bodies of black rats, and the fleas that fed on them slept a deadly Bacterium Yersinia pestis, silent, invisible, waiting for the right moment to strike. When Mongol armies laid siege to the Crimean port of Kaffa, in 1346 plague broke out among their ranks. Legend says the attackers. In 1347 the ships docked at Messina in Sicily. Men on the docks watched in terror as sailors stumbled out, bleeding, coughing, black swellings bursting on their skin. Within days, the disease spread from one household to another, and from Sicily it moved north to Italy, France, Spain, and beyond. The people called it the pestilence, the great mortality, the wrath of God. But no one truly understood what was happening. By the time winter arrived, the Black Death had already begun to devour the cities of Europe, and every attempt to stop it failed. Prayers, processions, and quarantine all proved useless, for death was already in the air, in the water, and in the hearts of men. No one was prepared for the terror that followed. Streets once filled with merchants and laughter became fields of corpses. Bells tolled endlessly, and smoke from funeral pyres covered the sky like a dark shroud. In Florence, entire families vanished overnight. In Paris, the dead were piled in pits, too shallow to hold them, and in London the carts rolled endlessly through the streets, their drivers shouting, "Bring out your dead." The symptoms were merciless fever, chills, and black swellings, cold buboes that oozed blood and pus. In just a few days the body turned cold, the breath failed, and death came suddenly. Priests refused last rites, doctors fled towns, and rulers locked themselves in castles, while the poor were left to die in their huts. Fear destroyed the bonds between neighbors and families. Children abandoned parents, husbands turned away from wives, and the sick lay untouched, for no one dared approach them. Many believed the plague was divine punishment for human sin. Flagellants marched through towns, whipping their own backs in hope of forgiveness. Others blamed the Jews, leading to brutal massacres. Across Europe, entire communities burned for a crime they never committed. The church, that had long been the heart of medieval life, began to crumble under the weight of doubt. How could God allow such suffering? Why did the prayers of the holy fail to save the innocent? Faith itself began to rot like the bodies in the streets, and from that decay something new began to stir. The first seeds of change. The Black Death was not only a sickness of the flesh, it was a sickness of society. When the bodies stopped falling, the kingdoms realized their strength had vanished. Entire villages lay empty fields. When untended crops withered and famine followed, trade halted, wars paused, and armies disbanded not. From peace, but from death, there were simply no men left to fight. The feudal system that had chained peasants to the land began to break. Lords begged survivors to return to work, offering them freedom and wages once unthinkable for the first time in centuries. The poor found power. They could demand better lives, and many did. Others fled to the cities where opportunity waited among the ruins. Churches stood hollow, and silent priests gone, nobles dead the plague had stripped away. The illusion of eternal order, leaving only questions: who ruled now, who owned the land? Who spoke for God? The answers would come slowly, but they would reshape Europe forever. From the ashes of despair rose new voices, writers, thinkers, and wanderers, who questioned everything about life and death and truth. And as the population shrank, art and learning began to change to focusing not only on heaven, but on humanity, on the fragile beauty of being alive. After witnessing so much death as decades passed, Europe began to breathe again. Though fewer in number, the survivors carried a new vision of life. Towns rebuilt, trade routes reopened, and the scars of plague became the roots of rebirth. Workers were in demand, wages rose, innovation followed. And so did rebellion against the old powers. In England, the peasants' revolt of 1381 showed how deeply society had changed. Ordinary men now dared to stand against kings. In Italy, cities like Florence and Venice rose again, but this time their wealth-fueled art, science, and thought. Not only war, painters, sculptors, and philosophers emerged, daring to imagine a world beyond fear. The church tried to regain its control, but doubt had already taken hold in people. As minds, many began to study nature, medicine, and the stars, seeking answers through reason rather than faith. The beginning of the Renaissance was born from the graves of the Black Death, a new Europe rising from ruin. Even as new generations grew old, they carried in their stories the memory of that dark time, the smell of death, the silence of prayer, and the unending question: why? But from those ashes came invention, reform, and a hunger for knowledge that would lead to exploration across oceans and the dawn of modernity itself. The Black Death never truly ended. It lingered in waves for centuries, reminding Europe that life and death walked hand in hand. But its greatest legacy was not death, it was transformation. The plague destroyed the old world, so that a new one could be born. It taught humanity that power could shift, that faith could falter, and that knowledge could heal. It forced medicine to evolve and sanitation to improve. It weakened feudalism and strengthened the rise of towns and middle classes. It turned fear into curiosity and despair into discovery. When historians look back, they see more than a tragedy. They see a turning point, the moment when medieval darkness began to fade and the light of modern Europe began to glow. The Black Death took half of Europe as people, but it gave birth to a new kind of mind, one that would question, rule, create, and dream as the centuries turned. And the memory of the plague faded, its echoes remained in the art, the literature, and the spirit of the people who rebuilt their world from nothing. And though death had walked among them, it could not erase the will of humanity to survive, to adapt, and to begin again.